We're expecting this to become a named storm, and as it makes its way toward the Gulf, eventually intensifying into a hurricane. Now, what is interesting to note, this is the 3 o'clock advisory. We're kind of more accustomed to the 4 o'clock, the 7 o'clock, the 10 o'clock. Well, now since the time change this weekend, these advisories will come in at 3, 6, and 9 o'clock. So we're actually getting them an hour earlier than we had. This is the very latest. Nothing really dramatically changed. Now, one thing that we have seen is a little bit more of an organization to that storm, which is why it has been upgraded from a depression to a storm. Well, we saw that upgrade when it went from a potential tropical cyclone to a depression, and now winds in excess of 40 miles an hour, so now it is a tropical storm. So with that intensity increase, the Hurricane Center is also thinking that it may become a Category 2 as it moves over western Cuba. Again, there will be some land interaction, likely helping to weaken it some. And then once into the Gulf of Mexico, something that we have been talking about even long before models have been grabbing onto this feature, trying to move into the Gulf of Mexico. The Gulf of Mexico now in early November is not the Gulf of August, September, and early October. It is a more hostile environment. Winds are going to be increasing. Dry air is going to be a major player, and the water temperatures are not supportive of the storm strengthening. In fact, it should be more supportive of the storm weakening. And that is still the expectation as we get more toward Friday, and then eventually Saturday. Kind of our little icon here needs to be moved a bit, but it does have it as a tropical storm south of the Louisiana coast. And it looks like at this point, Friday going into Saturday, we should see rapid weakening, not intensification. And there is still quite a bit of uncertainty with that long-range track. Let's take you through the two models, because to be honest, the spaghetti plot with this is almost useless. Remember, the spaghetti plot is only showing where the center of the storm will be. That really isn't as much of an issue for us as it moves deeper into the Gulf by the end of the weekend, because at that point, it will be weakening, it will be encountering a more hostile environment. So we don't really know what the structure of the storm is based on a spaghetti plot. So let's take a look at the models. This is the GFS, and in pretty decent agreement with the short-term forecast, moving over western Cuba, intensifying. Then once into the Gulf, this is where the models kind of take a little bit of a split. The GFS keeps indicating kind of what is left of the storm as we head toward Friday and Saturday, kind of moves toward Louisiana. Again, at this point, it is probably already more of a weak storm, maybe a depression, and really starting to fall apart. Notice the lack of much rainfall around the center as we head towards Saturday. Here is the Euro. Again, pretty decent agreement with the short term, moving over western Cuba and intensifying. Then once into the Gulf, we have that weakening. The Euro has been more on the path taking it due west. So once in the Gulf, staying well down to the south of the Louisiana coast. It's been the GFS that's been trying to bring it a little bit more toward the north central Gulf Coast. So the model's still very much in split as to what will eventually happen to the storm. However, both indicate it will be a weakening feature once it moves into the central Gulf of Mexico. So there still remains a pretty big spread in the models, and we'll just have to wait and see which one ends up being the more dominant of the two models. What they're both indicating is kind of an upper trough helping to draw the storm into the Gulf, but they both differ in this upper high that'll be off to the west of us or off to the east, and how far into the how far west that the high builds in. The Euro has it much stronger, kind of keeping that storm more on the western path, whereas the GFS has that upper high a little bit weaker, and that's why it has it moving more toward the north central Gulf. Both models, though, again, in decent agreement that it will be a weakening storm once in the Gulf of Mexico. This is, again, not a storm I am worried about, as it is November, not August, September, or even early October. Even late October, I would be paying maybe a little bit more attention to this, but with the more hostile environment across the north and central Gulf of Mexico, this is not one that we have to worry too much about. We're going to wrap things up here on air, but if you'd like to see a little bit more, we're going to continue this on our streaming app as well as online. For now, I'm Chief Meteorologist Chris Franklin.
This has been a severe weather alert from WWL Weather, sponsored by Egan Insurance Agency.
All right, and thank you if you're joining us on streaming, social media. We're going to get a little bit more in depth into Tropical Storm Rafael. Again, not a big surprise. It is the 3 o'clock advisory, and sometimes that may be a little bit confusing as we're so late in the season now. After our time change this weekend, now we get those advisories an hour earlier. So 3 o'clock, we'll get the next one at 6 p.m., not 7, and then the advisory after that at 9 p.m., not 10. So we're actually getting these an hour earlier now. And the Hurricane Center did find wind supportive of a tropical storm, which is why we had the upgrade, to TD18 earlier today, because they were able to find that closed circulation. Again, where it is in the Caribbean is still very much a hospitable environment for intensification and organization. Lack of wind shear, still very warm, deep water in the Caribbean. As you move into the Gulf, and while we have been very mild so far this fall, it has started to see the temperatures in the water decreasing. Water temperatures becoming a little bit cooler. Been great if we'd had some more strong cold fronts. Those water temperatures would be even cooler than they are right now. But even with the lower sun angle and the latter part of the season, we are starting to see those water temperatures come down. So not a dramatic change in the thinking from the Hurricane Center, expecting it to strengthen to a hurricane, a little bit of an increase in its strength as it moves toward western Cuba, possibly becoming a Category 2. And then that's when we'll start to see with the land interaction, although this part of Cuba is actually fairly flat. Once it gets into the Gulf, this is where we are anticipating the storm to begin weakening. Also notice the tropical storm wind field, very, very small, and really no longer expected to, other than maybe clipping around Southwest Pass, really not giving us any tropical storm force winds as we approach Friday and then eventually into Saturday. And this is really where the kind of days 4 to 5, where the models split. They're in good agreement in the short term. This is the official track of the Hurricane Center overlaid with the GFS forecast. Again, there's that intensification as it nears western Cuba. The GFS has been the one more leaning toward moving toward the northern Gulf Coast, so somewhere between, I don't know, Louisiana, maybe Florida. But also notice at this stage, this Friday, November 8th, it is a much weaker system, no longer much in the way of rainfall, and it'll be a far more unorganized, kind of sloppy system at that point. It's encountering more of a hostile environment along the northern Gulf Coast. So this one has been running a little bit more north than what the official forecast track is from the Hurricane Center. Let's take a look at the Euro. Again, overlaid the official track with the Euro. And again, pretty good agreement, moving almost northwesterly toward western Cuba, and again, there's that intensification. Once into the Gulf of Mexico, however, there's a little bit of thinking with the upper atmosphere with regards to what the GFS is thinking and the Euro. The Euro is thinking we're going to have this big upper high kind of building in from the Atlantic into the Gulf and keeping the storm more on a westward trajectory, keeping it well south of the Louisiana coastline. So that's why there is still kind of a unknown from almost Texas to Florida as to where exactly this storm eventually ends up. But remember, by the time we get toward Friday, Saturday, if there's still anything left by Sunday, Monday, it's a hostile environment and this thing is getting ripped apart. Where it is now, as mentioned, is deep warm water, low wind shear. As it continues northward, we have very shallow warm water, and then along the northern Gulf Coast, really northeast and northwestern Gulf Coast, water temperatures not supportive of tropical intensification. In fact, it should be weakening at that point. Not that these are cold water temperatures, but they need to be maintained at 80 degrees. Any time spent over water temperatures in the upper 70s will help to weaken the storm. And the wind shear. Now, both the models in agreement that the wind shear will be playing a big factor in the storm once we're in kind of the Thursday, Friday, maybe even into Saturday. We'll have strong wind shear coming out of the northwest. It's going to be, or out of the southwest, excuse me. This is going to help to rip the storm apart, kind of remove any storms away from the center and immediately begin weakening. Also at the same time, we're going to have some very dry air moving in from the southwestern Gulf, also helping to weaken the storm. So While it may look at a time that we've got a Category 2 or Category 1 hurricane coming right at the southeast Louisiana coastline, remember, we've kind of got this deflected dry air and strong and increasing wind shear that will help to weaken the storm long before it gets to the Louisiana coastline. So just kind of going back here, the reason, and this is looking at the GFS model, the reason for that thinking in the turn more toward the north per the GFS is this big upper high. It kind of stays more centered over the Atlantic, allowing the storm to kind of rotate or kind of move along the western periphery of that high and kind of continue more towards, say, the north central Gulf Coast. The Euro differs in bringing this upper high more into the eastern Gulf, and that's why the storm will be more turned toward the west. Both the models, though, again, in agreement with that weakening once we get later into the forecast period, so the end of this week and into the weekend, but they do differ on the upper air steering with exactly where the storm is going to go. So there is no real agreement with the long-term forecast of the storm. With regards to the track, what they do agree on is that this storm will be weakening and weakening rapidly once we get towards day 4, 5, and 6 of the forecast. That would be for Louisiana. A lot of folks have been saying, oh, wait, I thought we were done with our season. This is not expected to make landfall in Louisiana as a named storm, maybe as a weakening depression at the very most, the way things are looking right now. This is not expected to be a Louisiana hurricane by any means. So we'll be watching this closely over the coming days. We've got some upper atmosphere, the upper pattern is more favorable for this to be ripped apart. The exact unknown, though, is going to be this big upper level or mid-level high, just how far into the Gulf it's able to build. If not much, it may make a little bit more of a track toward Louisiana, maybe bringing us some rainfall. If it's a little bit more into the east, this storm is turning to the west and staying well down to our south. Again, we're in November. This is not September. This is not August. This is not even early October. This is not something that I am worrying about. This is something that we'll just be watching to see what, if any, impacts we actually see. We could squeeze out a few showers. That would be welcome. In fact, our rain chances will be a little bit on the higher side tomorrow as a front to our west approaches, but again, stalls out. We'll have a complete look at Rafael's forecast as well as when we could finally see a return to more fall-like temperatures coming up on WW Louisiana News at 5 o'clock. For now, I'm Chief Meteorologist Chris Franklin.